There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is your mountain.
Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Your Mountain podcast. As always, I'm your host David Wilms, and I am joined from Story, Wyoming. Beautiful Story, Wyoming by Nephi Cole.
It's beautiful.
I'm jealous.
Yeah.
You are living the life of luxury at the base of the Bighorn Mountains.
The audio's not as good as your audio in your comfortable office in Cheyenne, Wyoming, but the view is much better.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It's beautiful up there.
It's kind of undiscovered, and I'm glad about that because, and there's probably not enough room for it to really be discovered, but it's just crazy. Like, you wonder if they call it Story because it's really like kind of a storybook little place. It's like right at the foot of the Bighorns, giant trees everywhere. I swear it's 10 degrees cooler in the summer than any place else in the state. There's water everywhere. Mountains right behind you. I mean, this morning, I actually took a picture yesterday, but this morning I had 10 turkeys wake me up as they wandered basically 20 feet away from where I was sleeping. And we have a picture for the other day where it's like a turkey and a white-tailed deer 5 feet away from the truck, just like hanging out. And that's just Story.
Yeah, so I absolutely love the Bighorns. Obviously, and the Story area is beautiful. I'm not up there this summer, but I got out this week too while you're up there.
I saw
lounging in a lawn chair, feet up, reading books, whatever you're doing there.
You were adventuring.
I was adventuring, yeah, and I'm actually recovering. I think I damaged my rotator cuff. I'm pretty certain of that.
Probably, yeah. You're old.
But I did a whitewater trip down the Poudre River outside of Fort Collins, Colorado. It's actually Colorado's only designated wild and scenic river. It's west up in the mountains there out of Fort Collins. And I've done this trip, I don't know how many times, 6 or 7 or 8, I'm not sure. And I finally had the pleasure of joining the Poudre River swim team.
Oh, is that how you hurt your shoulder?
I think it must be.
Or was it just paddling?
Well, so arguably it was the paddling, but there was an awful lot of swimming against a high water current to try and get out. What's funny about this is I think you probably saw some of the photos. I actually had, for the first time ever, I took my GoPro on this. And so I had the GoPro footage of my entire run down the river. And it's embarrassing to say this. My wife said, made the comment that I flipped in the lazy river portion of the trip.
You just fell backwards off the boat when you were having a nap.
No, I wish that were the case. No, we got wrapped around a rock and it started to flip us up, and we went high side to pull it back down. And another raft came in and clipped us from behind. And that's what flipped us. And I have the video footage now to prove it as I'm flailing out of the boat. I can see that boat hitting the back of us.
You've got the guy's name and everything now, and you're you're looking into what his assets are so you can figure out
what I might own.
Yeah.
It was super cool. And I think I wound up 300-400 yard down river before I was able to get to shore. But it was really cool. I had a good time. Saw a bunch of bighorn sheep coming. They came down with their new lambs down to the water to drink, and just a cool experience. But my shoulder, like I said, I think I actually did some severe damage. We can call it old age. I think it was, grabbing onto branches, trees, whatever I could to try and get myself out of the water.
Well, I'm sorry.
Anyway, Mike doesn't have his...
Go ahead. Where is Mike?
I never know where he is anymore. I almost think he's just quitting on us. But,
I mean, I would have
I don't know.
by now.
Yeah, right. I don't know.
Sometimes I hate myself and I truly don't like you, so I don't know why.
I get that.
Yeah, I mean...
Feelings mutual, my friend. Or I use my friend with loose connotation.
So, I mean, I can see how Mike wouldn't want to wade into this pond of, anger and vitriol every week.
But
whatever, Mike.
I think he's gonna be bummed that he missed this one.
I think
I
so,
really do. Because this one's...
I hope so, but I always hope that.
Yeah, I think this one's kind of in his wheelhouse.
I'm more there's times when I think that the only reason we do this so often and we're so committed to it is so we can make Mike feel bad for not being here.
That's true. Although I should say this, we have been dialing these back. Like we've only been releasing an episode every other week during this pandemic. Partially because people just haven't been traveling, and we know a lot of people listen to podcasts when they travel, and we've got a lot of other commitments and things pulling on our time too that has made it hard. But I want to pose this question, I guess, to our listeners right now. We've been talking internally about when is a good time to go back to having an episode a week, and I'm asking folks listening to chime in. Are you ready for us to go back to releasing episodes weekly? Do you like this every other week way? Do you want us to just stop completely?
Yeah, if you're just sick of us.
If you're just completely sick of us, let us know.
Or better yet, just quit downloading the podcast if that's the case.
Yeah, well, I suppose.
No, don't.
But no, we need those downloads. But I'm genuinely curious. I really do want the feedback, listener feedback here, of when is it appropriate for us to go back, or not appropriate, but when would you like to see us go back to weekly episodes versus every other week? And reach out and let us know. Our email address is yourmountain@itsyourmountain.com. Find us on social media, all the usual places: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, at the handle @itsyourmountain. Let us know. Those are things that we want to know. One, how often do you want to hear us? And then two, follow up. Let us know what kind of content you want to hear. Let us know if you think there are things we could do better. Yeah, we really value the feedback.
There's some topics we're thinking about talking about, some new stuff.
Yeah, and if you have negative things to say, send it in email so only we see it. I really would. Yeah, don't go out there and rate us on wherever you download your podcast. Give us that 5-star rating. That'd be amazing. Say lots of good things. But then if you want to critique us, send us that email and say, I think you could do this better.
For those of you that have been critical of me and hoping that it will crush me, I really don't care.
I've been critical of you for years, and I haven't been successful at crushing you. That's where we are. Anyway, that's my quick pitch there. But let's move into the topic of the day. There is a lot going on in the conservation world. There's a lot going on right now, and we're only going to touch on a couple of things. I'm going to tell you really quickly. I'm going to flag a couple of items going on around the country, just of note, that we're not going to dive into. If you want us to dive into these in a future episode, let us know. Say, hey, that's one I'd like to hear more about. One of them is the Secretary of Interior proposing. Actually, it might be beyond just interior. It might be ag too, but proposing the use of e-bikes, expanding the use of e-bikes.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to say, Dave, we've talked a little bit about this, and I am vehemently opposed because I don't have an e-bike.
Yeah, well, we can have that discussion if people want to hear us have the e-bike discussion.
Yeah.
Also, there was a federal district court in Montana recently made a decision on some oil and gas leasing in Montana and Wyoming. That's where the decision was that the BLM had illegally issued these oil and gas leases that violated some of their own policies. We can go into a ton of detail about that, but it was really around sage grouse. It was the decision was based on sage grouse plans. We can go into that in great detail if people are really interested in knowing the nuances of public land management and leasing on public lands in sage grouse habitat. This case directly ties into that. We're not going to talk about those in detail, though.
No.
Because they're bigger fish to fry right now.
Yeah. I do feel this is a quick moment, though, as we're talking about BLM briefly and decisions that are made there, to say, once again, William Perry Pendley, I was so wrong. I'm very sorry.
Oh, the indefinite appointment just occurred. Yeah.
I as much as I hate to say it, Lantani, I owe you an apology. I was totally wrong. Totally wrong.
He's going to be there. You know, the one thing about him, I'll just mention it quickly. So William Perry Pendley was just not even through the same process. In the past, it was executive order. Now it's just been secretarial order. Now it's just he's indefinitely extended. There is a lawsuit that was just filed too, challenging those appointments as well. That's another issue. But the thing I wanted to mention, and we maybe have mentioned this before, but William Perry Pendley's conflict list that he's required to produce, to work as the acting director, is something in the nature of 17 pages long. Like, there is very little that he can actually do. I mean, remember that movie Office Space? What exactly would you say you do? And I think the answer here is not much. I can't do much. I'm conflicted out of everything. The one thing he was able to work very hands-on with was the transfer of the BLM headquarters to Durango, Colorado. No, I got the wrong town, didn't I?
Wasn't it Grand Junction?
Yeah, Grand Junction. Thank you. So he could do that, and I think he was able to do work on wild horses and burros, and I'm not sure what else. So anyway, I just wanted to float that out there. But it poses the question of, if somebody has a conflict list 17 pages long, do you really want that person? I mean, and you want somebody that can take all these duties and run an agency, but they're limited because of all their conflicts from their time in the private sector.
Yeah, I'm sure he doesn't weigh in on any of that stuff.
Yeah, probably not.
No.
No sarcasm.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's not what we're here to talk about either.
No.
Right? So we're going to talk about two things. I'll just give you a quick thing. We're going to talk, the second thing we're going to talk about, I'll tell you what that is. We're going to talk about, I'm going to say bears, literally bears, grizzly bears, black bears, but really the subject is going to be more like how the Endangered Species Act is used as a tool to stop otherwise lawful and long-standing activities. I'm just going to tee it up that way. That this is going to involve both black bears and grizzly bears. Mainly centers around grizzly bears, and we'll talk about that. But that's the angle that I'm looking at this from. So we'll get to that. But the first thing is, what was that?
Awesome.
You fine?
Awesome. Yeah. I just said awesome.
So the first thing we're going to get to, though, is perhaps, in fact, by the time this airs, it's possible that the Senate will have passed one of the biggest conservation-related bills in our lifetime. Now, we're pretty young. Nephi and I here, we're pretty young guys. So our lifetime doesn't actually, we've been around a while. This is this is a big deal. This is a really, really big deal, and it's on the precipice of moving out of the Senate. And I actually want to use this we're going to talk about the policy behind it. We're going to talk about some process too. I want to use this to clear some things up as far as process-wise, what's been going on. But what we're talking about is the Great American Outdoors Act. What is the Great American Outdoors Act?
It's a bunch of things. That's what's cool about it.
Yeah, it's really two big things. Right? I mean, it took two bills and combined them into one. But that one bill does so much, right? The one piece does so much. So here are the two things that make up the Great American Outdoors Act. I don't even know which order I should take them in. But one of them, okay, I'm going to take them this way. We're going to talk about deferred maintenance first.
Okay.
So there are two things that it deals with. One is deferred maintenance on federal lands, and second is permanently funding the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Let's talk about the deferred maintenance piece first. So, set the stage. Right now in this country, there's approximately a $21 billion with a B dollar maintenance backlog in national parks and other federal land, other
Federal
lands
land
managed by the federal government. More than half of that, almost 12 billion of that, is directly tied to national parks. So what is deferred maintenance? When you see this, I'll answer that in a second. Let's say, okay, so there's this maintenance backlog. So what this bill does is it establishes what's called the National Parks and Public Land Legacy Restoration Fund for the purpose of supporting those deferred maintenance projects on federal lands. And it sets up this fund where it says, okay, there's all this revenue that comes in from oil, gas, coal, renewable energy, alternative energy on federal lands and waters. And the bill says for the next 5 years, from fiscal year 2021 to 2025, there has to be an amount equal to 50% of all of those revenues that come in has to be deposited into this fund, with the exception of that there's a cap on that. It can't exceed 1.9 billion with a B for any fiscal year. So a maximum of $1.9 billion a year get put into this deferred maintenance fund for the next 5 years to address these maintenance backlogs. So that brings the question of, okay, what is deferred maintenance? Should I answer? Should I?
Well, Dave, you can. I'm going to guess that it's toilets that are broken down, roads that need to be paved. It is a roof at some lodge that is probably deteriorating. It's stuff that if you don't fix it now, it's just going to keep deteriorating and be worthless.
Right. I mean, that's nailed it. Basically nailed it. Right. Bridges, tunnels, parking lots, bathrooms,
infrastructure,
buildings. It's the thing that makes your visit to a park pleasant, or allows you to visit a park.
And it's not new stuff, and so that's probably important for people to think that's like, oh, it's some windfall of money that's going to be used to build a new, rocket ship to land in Yellowstone. It's not. This is upkeep of the stuff that's on there now. And it does bring up some interesting questions, and this is part of some of the controversy, I think, about passing the act, is there are some people that think that the federal state is too large, and that the reason that we have this maintenance backlog in the first place is because we have too many national parks. That has been said, and it's, go listen to one of our first podcasts with the outdoor recreation industry where we talked about this. But yes, I mean, this is that's a concern of some people that are arguing about this act, because you'd think on its face, like, who couldn't get behind this? Who wouldn't be behind? And why wouldn't everybody love this act? Well, there's a few senators who are griping about it because they're using it as an opportunity to make their case on that side of the coin.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. And I want to talk about, once we introduce the LWCF part 2, I want to talk about some of the pros and cons that are floating out there around this bill as a whole, because it seems to me that a lot of the opposition to this bill it actually falls into the LWCF camp. There are some definitely on the deferred maintenance part. So here's some of the concerns I've seen, kind of building off what you said, Nephi, on the deferred maintenance piece. The one of the arguments I've seen is, okay, this creates a temporary fix, right? We're throwing a bunch of money at these different federal agencies. And by the way, this isn't just for the Park Service. This deferred maintenance can be used by the Park Service, the Forest Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, and Bureau of Indian Education.
Yep.
And so
it's money. It's money to care for again, lands that belong to all of us, for campgrounds that belong to all of us, for opportunities that belong to all of us as Americans.
Yeah, right. And so, but one of the concerns that's coming up that I've heard expressed is, we got to this point of having a backlog of $21 billion for a reason, and throwing money at this deferred maintenance issue isn't going to address the bigger systemic issues of that have allowed for this deferred maintenance to pile up. It's going to allow cutting into that backlog, but then there's nothing there to force a reassessment of how maintenance priorities are made by the agency or how funding will occur in the future. And we could find ourselves 10 years from now right back in the same situation where we're sitting on another $20 billion maintenance backlog. Yeah. And I'm not unsympathetic to that argument, right? I guess where I said I'm not unsympathetic to that argument of, are we really fixing the problem, or are we just putting a Band-Aid on it temporarily? But at the same time, we've got to do something. And sometimes you can put a Band-Aid on something to provide a temporary fix while you work on a long-term solution. You don't necessarily have to have both at the same time.
Yep. And that's exactly what we're talking about in that. I think it was either podcast number 2 or 3 of the podcasts we ever did. We were talking specifically about how do you meet, that $20 billion backlog. Well, how do you get to that today? And we talked about, we have an $800 billion outdoor recreation economy. What would an outdoor recreation tax look like? Like Pittman Robertson, the hunters and fishermen have signed up to do to protect our resources that we care about. Well, what if everybody threw just a little bit of coin into the piggy bank? What would that look like? What could that look like for public lands maintenance? And that's because the outdoor recreation industry originally, as you know, was developed to fight just such a tax, a backpack tax, if you will. And so
you're talking the Outdoor Industry Association.
I am, yes.
Right. That association was established to fend off a backpack tax.
Yeah.
Successfully, might add.
Yes. Now, having said that, let's all remember that they are actually proponents of this current legislation. They like this, as do the organizations that we work for as well. Like, this is a good thing. We are all in favor of this. This is a great thing.
Yeah, and remember, there are the national parks, for example. I mean, they bring in more than 300 million visitors a year in the National Park Service around the country. That is an astronomical number. But what's also, I guess it raises a question, and this is the future discussion, 300 million visitors to the park, and that still doesn't generate enough revenue to address these maintenance issues. And we're not talking about extravagant maintenance issues. We're talking about having fully functioning wastewater systems to deal with all the visitors.
having toilet seats on the toilets. Very important.
Right. We're talking about having basic adequate housing for temporary workers or even more permanent workers in these parks, where you're trying to provide housing for folks that are working in the restaurants or cleaning these facilities. We're talking about basic trail maintenance. Like if you have a big washout and you can't use a trail or a bunch of down timber, having somebody being able to go in there and cut out that timber to keep that trail accessible for the public. We're talking about just the basic fundamental infrastructure needs that can to enable these parks to support 300 million plus visitors a year.
Yeah.
This money provides a real needed shot in the arm, and maybe buys a little bit more time for a deeper policy discussion to see, okay, how do we solve this bigger problem?
Yeah.
Of generating the revenue to support what I think unquestionably people would say are some of our most cherished national treasures that we want to see conserved and preserved and yet still accessible to the public to enjoy, right?
Yeah.
Like the Yellowstones and the Yosemites and all that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, an analogy that I'll make just because of where we're at, Dave and I, we talked about this. I'm up here at a family cabin that was, originally built in the 1920s. And when you think about that, like, that was really cool that somebody made that investment in the 1920s. But guess what? If somebody doesn't come up here and clean up, and make sure the well works, fix the roof and all those things, it doesn't matter what, that investment goes away. That investment really does become junk. It becomes unusable without care, without somebody doing some work to make sure that future generations can also, so that my kids can enjoy the same location that I'm enjoying today. And it's very much the same with our national parks. There's a gut check that, we are responsible for it. If we want to have these things, we have to be responsible for them, or they go away.
I also think this current pandemic has been an eye opener for the lacking infrastructure on. Let's take the national parks out of the equation even, and just talk about national forests and BLM. I have seen reports from. Well, first of all, let me back up just a second. The one thing people have been able to do during the pandemic is get out into the great outdoors in record numbers. We saw in Wyoming, our state parks visitation from the same time last year is up 160%. And you're seeing this happen all over the country. People are getting out. Parking lots in national forests at trailheads are spilling over all days of the week. I've noticed it myself. Right? But the other side of that story, the cool part of everybody getting out there, there's a flip side to that story. And I've seen some folks on social media that I follow that have been posting about this, and it's about the increased amount of waste. I mean, human waste, trash, damage, resource damage from people driving off road because there's a lack of enforcement, but also there's not the capacity to have the facilities to deal with the number of people visiting these places. And so just having resources to be able to have these basic infrastructure needs that are necessary to support people visiting the great outdoors, it doesn't just apply to the National Park Service. It applies to all these places we recreate. And, we need them because there are some bad apples out there that, if that, well, not just bad apples, if that porta potty is not available, or if that, not porta potty, but, if that bathroom facility is not open or available, people got to go, right? And they're just gonna go, and they might not dig that hole and bury their waste.
Anyway, it's. I mean, I'll poke at somebody, but like I was recently at a state park with the family, and when you're quite a ways away from a city and you're at a state park, and somebody's made the wise decision to lock all the restrooms in order to keep, to reduce the spread of COVID-19, you're going to close all the public facilities and lock them down at a location that's going to see traffic. Maybe not the smartest management idea ever, but hey, that's just my opinion.
Were there a lot of people waiting about waist deep in the water while you were there?
Yeah, exactly.
Just a surprising number of people that were just waiting out in the water.
No. Yeah. Well, there you go. Just a critique, friendly critique.
Yeah. So let me circle back on this, and we'll get to the second half of this bill. So the other thing I think that's really important to mention, because I've seen some misreporting on this in the media. This money cannot, and I will repeat, it cannot be used for land acquisition. This deferred maintenance money, right? It has to go to very specific purposes. And one of them, the bill very specifically says it cannot be used for land acquisition. And I know that there's some people out there that are concerned about that. We'll talk about that more on the LWCF piece too.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
We'll talk about that more on the LWC. This is very specific to the National Parks Public Land Legacy Restoration Fund portion
of the bill
of the Great American Outdoors Act.
Yep.
Right. Okay. So that's the first half of it. Before we get into the second half of it, I want to talk about a little bit of let's wonk out just a little bit. Because I think the LWCF portion is that'll be a fun discussion. But I want to talk about how bipartisan this is right now. But I also want to clear up a couple of, you know what? No, I'm going to tee that up. We're going to do it after LWCF. I think it'll be better right after we talk about the whole bill. I'm going to talk about some of the procedure stuff, what's going on in the Senate right now with it. But let's do it at the end. Okay. So the second half of this bill, the Great American Outdoors Act, it makes funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund permanent. And to make sure that we're clear about this, LWCF was formally reauthorized,
Permanently reauthorized.
last year.
Yep.
And so this bill doesn't do anything to the allocation formula, like how money is allocated stateside versus federal, what the money can be used for. All this bill does is it says, okay, so LWCF authorizes expenditures of up to $900 million. And what this bill does is it says it's going to be $900 million. It's not going to be up to. It's going to be $900 million, and it's going to be that every year, forever.
And this is where I said there's you said two parts of it, but this is where LWCF itself, there are multiple programs that sit underneath LWCF, some of them controversial, some of them not controversial at all. And so
I knew that's what you were getting at, by the way.
Exactly. And so that's where I said there's a virtual Pandora's box of arguments to be opened up under LWCF. And this is where some of the senators, I believe, really went to and started to gripe about some of this stuff. And that's where the land acquisition piece comes in, correct?
Yes, for sure. There are a number of things. And maybe we should start there. Because I want to end with reasons that you might want to support this, the permanent funding. And remember, this isn't about supporting LWCF. LWCF is permanently authorized. It is there. This is about the money for LWCF and where that. So here are some of the arguments that are being made against this bill. One of them, and I've got, just so you know, Nephi, I've actually got a list of about 7 or 8 here. So we can take them one against the bill.
Okay.
Against it. So we can.
Ready, you go.
Ready? All right. Number 1, that it creates more than $14 billion in new mandatory spending. That's including the park maintenance piece, the 5 years of that, and LWCF. $14 billion in new mandatory spending. There are always concerns with budget hawks that creating mandatory, that discretionary spending is better than mandatory spending. That once you've earmarked something as mandatory, you could be forcing your grandkids to pay for it if the money's not there.
We just gave away $2 trillion, so $1 billion doesn't bother me anymore.
We did. I'm
over it.
You want to talk about shouldering our kids and grandkids with debt?
Yeah.
$2 trillion.
What's a few billion?
Is it worth explaining how that works, by the way? Are we competent enough to explain how that?
I don't even want to wade in.
You don't even want to go into the fact, the whole treasury bond process. I mean, it's basically they take out a $2 billion loan that we and other countries that are paying for, and the government's then agreeing to pay back those bonds at a favorable rate over some period of time. And you're trusting that the economy is going to be better then than it is today, so they can pay it off.
Let's not go there.
I'm just that's the 10-second overview of what just happened.
So that was number 1. Ready to go.
Number 1. Yeah, number 2. Of the $900 million for LWCF. One of the big concerns is that for the way that allocation worked is 60% of that money goes stateside. 40% of that money is held by the federal government and can be used, like you were mentioning, Nephi, for various purposes. One of the concerns floating out there is that means that 40% means it's $360 million per year that could theoretically be used to acquire new lands.
Yes. And it's something that, and that's a big beef with people. So the question is, and again, this circles back around to that argument with people saying like, well, you've got this maintenance backlog because you have too many lands, federal government. You can't take care of what you got. So why do you possibly need $360 million to buy more lands when you have a maintenance backlog on those lands that you already have? What's up with that?
Right. You should figure out how to manage what you have first,
and before you
add to that estate, right?
Yep.
I get that argument.
Yeah,
I get that argument. But I was going to say, go ahead.
We've benefited from that money, and I say we. I mean, you and I worked for the administration of a guy named Matt Mead, and let's be honest, we had some parcels inside a national park that we thought belonged in the federal estate rather than in the state's hands. And so it just made sense to trade those parcels out. The best way to do that is cash money. Say, hey, look, we've got some land inside Grand Teton National Park. Would you like it? Because we think that we should sell it to you as part of the national park rather than building a casino on it.
Right. And what was the consequence of that action? From a maintenance standpoint, it was one parcel, a total of 2 parcels in Grand Teton National Park that were state school sections that we were leasing out for grazing at some nominal rate, right?
Yep.
And instead, the state pulled in something. I'm going to get the number. Like 25 million, or was it more like 40 million?
Yeah.
I think it was 40. I think the federal one of the LWCF piece was like 25. It was almost a $50 million purchase.
It was a significant chunk of change
that went back into schools in the state.
Yeah, I thought a casino would have been wonderful.
Yeah, that was that or apartments. I think we were looking at condos up there as a possible.
Condos, I was bored.
I wanted to be on the ground floor getting that view.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of the biggest arguments. But I'd also mention that I think that's a little hyperbolic too. Because if you look at the past and how that money is utilized, if the federal government were to have $360 million a year on that federal side program, it's not being used to acquire $360 million worth of land into the federal estate. There might be pockets like what you described where there might be land acquisition, but a lot of it might be used for access easements.
That's right.
Right.
And that's
or trails, or constructing trails to create access to new areas. I mean, access is a big part of that program.
Yes, and I think that's what's lost. And the argument, I think it's a valid argument of saying like, okay, well, if you live in one area and you have boundaries of a forest, and these purchases are expanding those boundaries outward by significant margins to pick up, these new spaces. Yeah, I can see you arguing that. In most cases, that's not what's happening. In most cases, we're seeing the uses of these lands stay exactly the same. The boundaries of locations stay consistent. What you're seeing is a removal of patchwork, within the interior. You're seeing opportunities absolutely increase for public access and public use of lands. So
consolidation, land exchanges to help open up access. Yeah, all that kind of stuff.
And I know we'll take some flack from somebody for having said that, but that's the reality.
Probably. All right, so here's a couple others. Another one. We've talked about this. It's a one-time shot in the arm, but doesn't do anything to prevent the issue of preventing maintenance backlog in the future. Already talked about that. Here's another one. It's a loss of congressional oversight of spending. So up to this point, funds were appropriated every year by Congress based on specific proposals presented by the agencies. Right? Now it's viewed as a blank check of $900 million to the agency every year and in perpetuity, and it could lead to unnecessary and wasteful spending. And I can be semi-sympathetic to that argument, except there are reporting requirements in this bill. And so there are accountability reports that the Government Office of Accountability is going to prepare 5 years out. And then Congress at any time can ask for reports from the agency on how the spending is done. And at some point, if Congress looks at it and says, boy, there's a lot of wasteful spending there, you're just, this $900 million is just getting blown, they can technically revisit it. I understand the argument that it's hard to undo something at Congress once you've done it. I totally get that. It can take years to accomplish anything. But the fact is, there's not that immediate every year accountability that comes from a direct appropriation on an annual basis. But there's always accountability because Congress can call any agency head in at any time for a hearing or demand information from that agency on how they're using that money and spending the money that Congress has appropriated.
And I understand the argument on the opposite side. And the argument on the opposite side is, well, lately we've gotten to these we've gotten into a game where of holding things hostage, of that that probably shouldn't be, of arguing over everything when maybe we shouldn't. And so there's a really strong argument that says, like, yeah, it would be fine if the budgetary process worked where every, X amount of months people got together and actually passed a budget and talked about it in a productive way and moved things forward. But when we're in an environment where that doesn't happen, and how often has that actually happened for LWCF, where, that's like, you're really making a strong argument for why it's necessary to just pass it now, and then, okay, if there's a problem, we'll revisit in the future. But the promise that we're going to actually get it done year after year, in a, that it can
was
be argued.
fully funded twice.
Yeah.
To your point, Congress fully appropriated money twice to LWCF.
Yeah.
In its history.
So, and again, I can see both sides of the coin, but you can obviously see where we're saying, like, hey, maybe we should just do this and not argue about it every 12 months.
Yeah. So here's another one. The fact that it's going to add to the national debt. Unless you pull money from someplace else, you do mandatory spending. Unless you cut spending someplace else, you're going to add to the national debt.
We've covered it.
We covered that.
Yep. We don't care about billions anymore.
Right. And then I'm going to highlight one specific senator actually here. Actually, probably two.
I bet I can guess what state they're from. Go ahead. No,
I'll give you a chance. So there, a few of them are from the Gulf Coast states.
Oh, you surprised me.
And then I'll give you the one that you probably are expecting.
Okay.
There are a number of folks from coastal states, like Louisiana in particular, and Alaska. The senators from those states have had, in particular, and I can't remember if Florida was one or not. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus that doesn't deserve it. But the argument being, this money. In fact, I wish I could have the quote in front of me, because I believe it was a senator from Louisiana that said, relative to this $900 million coming from offshore oil and gas.
Yep.
Right. Why are we disproportionately sending money to states where people vacation rather than the places where people work and live? I mean, that was basically the quote. And I'm thinking, well, I'm glad that people like to vacation where I work and live, but he was, implying that they're the ones generating the revenue and they should be entitled to a larger share of that revenue. And
so for people, again, we've covered this on another podcast as well, so go listen to it. But for people that don't understand the allocation formula for LWCF, that money that comes from offshore oil goes into an account and then is redistributed to all the other states. It is not redistributed equally. So Louisiana already gets more than an interior state does. But those states that are on the coasts, that have coastline, they are making the pitch that, like, well, maybe we should get a lot more rather than just a little more on top of this. And so that's where you're seeing that come from. This is a financial play saying, well, I know that we all agreed to this in the past, how we were going to distribute this income, because it's not equally distributed. But maybe we'd like a little bit more of that pot right now. And that's what's happening.
Yep, that's right. Now, the other one. Who did you think I was going to say?
I thought you were going to say Lee.
I was. That was going to be the next one. That was going to be the next one, because he had some great quotes, too. He says that Utah will be harmed by the legislation. Senator Lee from Utah. One of them was the inequity of natural resource sharing between the federal government and the states. Just talked about that. Another one of his points was the cost of the National Parks Public Land Legacy Restoration Fund, the cost of LWCF.
Yeah. The implications of ever expanding federal land.
You got it. That's the biggest one. That's probably the biggest one. Anyway, those are some of the big arguments that have come up. And
we did not talk about this beforehand, by the way. I just knew that was
I know.
Interesting.
I figured,
like, you end up in the same, like, people looking at something objectively can come to the same conclusion, without talking about it.
So that's the list of the reasons why folks are opposing it. We've talked about some of the reasons that there's support for it. But let me talk about a couple more of the support reasons that are out there. one, obviously, it's working to address that $21 billion. Go ahead, Nephi.
Before we say this, let's just throw this out. Just it's worth saying. It is interesting, and I'm not saying either way. It's interesting that where the pushback on this bill has routinely come from, and it just kind of, it's almost mind-boggling that, you know, it seems to be this, honestly, the same geographic region all the time. There you go.
Yeah, no, it does. You're basically implying that folks that have larger federal land holdings to begin with, the states that have the larger federal land holdings, tend to be more critical of the bill.
Yeah, and not just that. To be frank, Utah. You know, the delegation from Utah really, and we talked about that also. Go listen to Your Mountain podcast with Braden Shepard, and listen to that with you know, honestly, listen to it to see if you can figure out why, you know, that this is like a more of a long-standing, you know, burr under the saddle of Utah than it is, to be frank, about this specific bill. I believe that this is, I mean, it's since the 80s that they have been fighting this fight, and it's
I think the 1880s.
It's really unique that you get that, especially from a state that, you know, Utah has what they call it the 8. Isn't the Great 8 national parks in Utah? And
I thought it was 5. The Big Five.
We'll call it the Big 5 then.
Big 5, Great 8, whatever.
They got
it's
some
a bunch.
moniker.
It's a bunch.
Sorry, Utah. But I mean, that's what makes it really, you know.
Well, now I want to name them. Right?
Okay.
Canyonlands, Zion, Arches.
That other one.
The other one and that other
and that
one
other one.
also.
5 it is.
No, Bryce Canyon.
5 it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be 5.
Yeah. And then and I can understand when you look at the history of federal land management in Utah, you can, and you listen to Braden Shepard, you can kind of hear and understand where the burr came from, how they started, you know, being upset with this, and then they feel, probably rightfully so, that they have been abused, you know, in the past by growth of the federal state or by changes in management paradigm of the federal state.
I think that's the bigger one, because of all it's not just national parks, but they have a lot of national monuments, and a lot of the national monuments they have in Utah were created through the Antiquities Act by the stroke of a pen of a president, rather than through a congressional, you know, a congressional designation where their delegation had the opportunity to give an up or down vote. And in some cases, they felt burned by that. And they felt like it's changed the culture and the management of the land. And they felt burned by it.
And especially their rural communities. A number of rural communities have felt like they were hurt by it. And again, you're talking about a state that has, you know, Salt Lake City, the Wasatch Front, and then a lot of traditional rural landowners, ranchers. And then, I mean, for people to, like, this is why you don't do this to people. This is why you have to be careful in how you work through politics. Because wouldn't it be nice for those of you who care about these issues if you didn't just, you know, if you didn't have this predictable block of animosity that may have very legitimate roots. But you've got it now. You're not going to get away from it. So wouldn't it be great if you didn't have that? If you, like, could work through it? And I think you could work through it in the past. Can you now? I don't know if you can now. I think you probably could. But that's why you don't just, when you have power, when you have the authority to do something, that's why you don't just go in and just, you know, crack people with a hammer. It's, you know, done differently. We might have an entirely different dialogue about this right now.
Right. Okay. So we've kind of run through. Was I still on? Oh, I was going through some of the reasons for support out there.
Yes.
I talked about the maintenance backlog. But another thing is we're at a point here where we need to add jobs. A lot of people are out of work right now, and we need to figure out ways to add jobs quickly. And a lot of the recovery stimulus bills that have come out have been targeted at either keeping people in their homes and keeping people employed by helping companies make payroll. But they've also been meant at spurring the economy and helping create jobs, right? And one thing this does is it helps create jobs. If you're doing maintenance work, backlog work, if you're doing bridge work and road work and there's a lot of jobs created. In fact, I think it was Senator Gardner when he was speaking in support of this bill, which he's been really out front on from Colorado. I think the number he threw out there was it could create over 100,000 jobs almost immediately at a time we need jobs. So that's a reason that folks can get on board and kind of support this. Another one is, and we touched on it a little bit, but it's protecting and expanding access for hunting and fishing and other outdoor recreation. Like we've had, remember when we had Joel Webster on to talk about the work that the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership has done to identify places that there is no permanent legal access in the federal estate, and we're talking millions upon millions of acres. And one thing that this can do is help you use these resources to help create more access opportunities to some of these currently inaccessible places that are out there. Another thing can help protect resource damage. For example, it can, you deploy the resources in the right way and use the right education, and you can help prevent resource damage and limit resource damage. They're just, and that doesn't even get to the stateside piece of LWCF, and we haven't even talked about that. But all the money that goes into local parks and ball fields and swimming pools and all the and trails and all the different things that the states use their money for in LWCF that really supports an even broader population. And really, I would argue that you'd be hard pressed to find a person that has not been impacted by LWCF in some way at some point in their life. Like that, I would challenge anybody to find a person that has not used some kind of a facility or park that hadn't received some kind of money from LWCF. Maybe those people are out there, but it touches virtually every county in the country. So that's another reason to support. Plus, I'd put it this way: there's at a time when we're supporting, we're looking at large infrastructure projects around the country. Rightfully, we need to be working on bridges and roads and dams and all these different infrastructure needs that we have around the country to make our society work. There are consequences to infrastructure projects, right? And one nice thing about this is there's the conservation side of it too. So it kind of creates a nice balance to some of the other things that we might be doing that might not have the greatest positive impact on our natural environment, right? And so there's another good reason behind it. So there are perfectly valid reasons to not support this bill. We've talked about it. You can make a straight face argument about those. I tend to fall in the camp of pretty strongly supporting this bill on a personal level, right? It's just I've been impacted by it in a lot of ways in my life. I've seen the good that LWCF does, and I want to see it fully funded forever. I want to see these projects continue. I go to national parks. In fact, I'm going to go to a couple this weekend, and I would like to use a restroom facility in a national park while I'm there.
Yeah. That's preferable to the alternative, certainly.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
I agree with you. I agree with you. On a personal level, interestingly enough, we both work for organizations that, many might see as on opposite sides of the political spectrum, and both of our organizations support it too. So,
yeah, they're all in.
Good thing. Yeah,
for sure. And that kind of leads to that point of just how, I mean, you talk about our own organizations being on different sides of a political spectrum.
And and we do not speak on behalf of them on this podcast.
We don't.
And we are not endorsed by them. This podcast is its own mess.
And and say that 2-3 times. Yeah. I'm also going to say
its own mess.
We're not a political organization. So it's hard for me to say opposite ends of the political spectrum.
We're not either.
We take different positions on different issues sometimes, but we're not a political organization.
Yeah.
So I want to clear that up, and I'm not speaking for that organization about all the disclaimer stuff you just talked about.
Yes.
But that gets me to the procedure piece, right? I mean, you talked about where organizations sometimes take different positions on things, think differently about things. Here, we have a bill with 59 co-sponsors. Needs 60 votes to pass the Senate. Started with 59 co-sponsors. I do want to address a couple of things. I've seen a couple of news stories. I've seen people posting on social media about some votes, and we're in the week. We're just finishing out the week of. It's June 12th right now. It's Friday, June 12th, while we record this. And earlier this week, we had a couple of votes in the Senate. We had one in particular that got a lot of press on this bill. And I started to see all this social media out there and people saying, oh, it passed the Senate. The Great American Outdoors Act passed the Senate. What an exciting time. Now, hopefully the House steps up and passes the same bill. That's not what happened. As of today, it hasn't passed the Senate yet. It had a cloture vote. Right? Basically, and what that means is the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, allowed a vote to end debate on the bill.
That means it can move forward.
It can move forward. And now they had some debate about amendments, and they're getting all the procedure piece out of the way so that the hope is that next week, when this airs, when you're listening to this, there may have already been a vote on the bill in the Senate, or it's coming within days in the Senate. So just to be clear about that, as of recording, it has not passed the Senate. That vote will probably occur next week sometime, or the week that you're listening to this, right? So the week of the 15th of June. I just think that's an important piece. You see a vote, you think, oh, it passed. Not yet. And it still has to you still have to have a bill pass the House, and then you still have to have conference committee meet and resolve any differences in the bill. You have to have both bodies then adopt it, and you have to have the president sign it. So we're still a little ways from the finish line on this, but you can actually kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel on this bill.
It's going to pass.
And it looks like it's probably going to become law this Congress, which is...
Maybe. It looks like the Senate's going to pass it.
Right. It'll be easier to pass the House than the Senate. The Senate was the harder one, and that's, I think, why it started there. Senate's going to be the harder one. And then we'll see if those senators that needed this for re-election get reelected this fall. Right? So here's the deal. So that's where we are on it. We'll keep you updated. We'll let you know when this thing passes. If there are any weird twists or turns, we'll talk about those twists or turns. I know I'm going to mess with you, Nephi, here. I know I said we were going to do 2 topics and we were going to talk bears.
Oh.
I selfishly have to go pick up a minivan that I'm renting to take my family on a trip to the Black Hills. And so
we'll do bears another day.
I think we can probably fill a whole podcast talking about bears.
I know I can.
Are you good with doing bears another day?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. I don't mean to end so abruptly, but this rental car place closes early. Like it closes early.
You go get that minivan. You go have an adventure.
I will have an adventure in a Chrysler Pacifica, or whatever they're going to give me.
I will make fun of you for it.
You always do. That's why I just am owning it right now.
Yeah.
I'm so cheap. I don't like to take my own cars on road trips. And
everyone knows, Dave. Everyone
car
knows.
rentals are really cheap right now. So may as well just do it.
That's a solid point.
What,
Everybody do something good for the economy. Go rent a minivan.
Look, I am doing something good for the economy. I'm renting a minivan.
Go rent a minivan.
I'm gonna help support our national parks.
I'll do that. I'm not gonna go rent a minivan, but I'm in fact I'm not gonna endorse it any longer. You guys can do that if it's right for you. It's not right for me.
It's for my own sanity. My kids, they need to be in separate rows, and I could just get a vehicle with third row seating, but I gotta admit, man, you sit up on that throne in a minivan, and it's super comfortable. There's like 20 cup holders everywhere. You just, I don't know, you feel like a king, and then you get out of it and look at it, and you're like, oh, yeah. It's still a minivan. But
you go get that dad van. You enjoy that.
I'm going to get those dad wheels, and we're going to have a good time. But, hey, do you have anything else that you want to add on this topic?
I don't.
Anything you want to recommend people do? There's still time to contact your...
If this goes live and you haven't talked to your senator yet and it hasn't passed, then do so. Reach out and just say, hey, look, thumbs up. It doesn't have to be long. Give them frankly, be courteous and be short. And just say, this is a good thing, and hit send. They will register that as hey, there's a check mark. You do not have to write a page or a paragraph or whatever. Literally, in the subject line, say, I am pro this bill. Boom. And move.
Yep. And after, if it does pass, and you're pleased with how your senator voted, send them a message saying, hey, thanks. One thing, this is a slight tangent, but one thing going back to yours and my time in the governor's office, we did not get a lot of people writing in saying, hey, good work.
Yeah.
Nice job, Governor. I
don't think I ever got that. I did get an award.
I did not. I did not get any awards.
Well,
and I got a lot of... Maybe you should have
done more for the communities of Wyoming.
I suppose Foundation. So. What I found out was that we just received... if people were going to write in, it was because they were upset with something, not because they wanted to say, job well done. So I'm just putting out there as somebody that worked as a staffer for an elected official, and watched this elected official, work their life away, work so hard and was so passionate about the state and really was trying to do everything for the right reasons. And then, every now and again, everybody likes a good slap on the back, a good attaboy. So I'd say, post something saying thank you somewhere, even if it's just on their social media page, just say thanks. And then turn your attention to the House.
Vote for him. There you go.
Yeah, vote for him. Yeah. All right. Well, I got nothing.
All right.
Huh?
Nope.
All right. I got nothing else. You get back to your family. Enjoy your vacation, Nephi. I appreciate you taking the time to do this podcast. I hope Mike is having fun or not having. Actually, I hope he's not having fun doing whatever he's doing right now.
Yeah, Mr. I'm on a family vacation. Can't hang out with Dave and Nephi.
Right. Yet here you are on a family vacation, totally ignoring your family and hanging out with me. And it's much appreciated.
They're having lunch right now.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, we'll enjoy that rest of that trip. I'm going to get on to mine. And for everybody out there listening, remember that life is about experiences, so go have one.